be here.
Thank you, thank you. It's
Hello
such
there,
an
Pat.
honor.
Hi.
Hello there, April. How are
Good to
you?
see you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
I'll be there in a minute.
Sounds good.
So, Amalia, you're at the epicenter of everything that's going on right now. How's on site at the university going?
It's, I'm getting goosebumps just even thinking about it. Right now, there's been protests. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky. Louisville has been a lot more violent in a way, and the police has been a lot more. They've been doing a lot more arrests. But on Thursday, there were 4 arrests in a protest that we were in, and then yesterday, last night, there were 6 arrests here, and we were just protesting on the streets very peacefully. Lexington has a very, we have a history here of very peaceful protests, so it's really frustrating to see the arrests that have been happening. I haven't been to the ones in Louisville, but just a lot of frustration and a lot of impotence in a way for everything that's been happening.
Yeah, I can only imagine. But how does it also? I'm gonna switch you for just 2 seconds. What about being on site at the university with COVID? How is that working for you? Do you feel safe? Is the university kind of taking care of the distancing? Are you able to really experience your program? That's a lot of questions. Can you?
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's so much, and it's so layered, and there's so many things going, happening all at once, and so many feelings. So I teach a hybrid class at the moment, and I'm also a student because I'm in my graduate program, and we weren't allowed back into the studios until a week before, and so that was a loss for me of several months worth of studio access and resources. But now the university has made it very, very clear that we're, our safety is their top concern. We were given wellness kits, and we have to check in every day to make sure that we're not experiencing any symptoms. And they've now started random testing to make sure, just so that they can sample how the student body, how the virus is, and how the pandemic is kind of, like within our micro scale. But it's so hard to teach in a hybrid format and to be a student in a hybrid format, and even online, because so much about the way that we connect with people is by seeing our faces. And in studio classes, everything is so hands-on. I work with fibers. I want people to touch my work. I had an installation here that I had designed so that people would go into this specific setting and be able to touch the work. And so it's so difficult for me, at least. It's been very, very hard.
You had an installation. Is that what you're referring to? Just very recent? When did it start? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I had an installation here. It was actually, it started in March, and then the pandemic hit and everything closed down. And so I came back in June to finish it up, and then it was up until August, the end of August. But all of that changed, and the experience that people had with it completely changed. And yeah,
well, I can imagine. And April, you graduated, correct?
Right, I graduated.
And so that you lost, or maybe you didn't lose, I'm not quite sure, but since you both went to the same school, what was since March through the end of your semester, what was that like for you?
That was pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just describe it as that because I've waited so long to go to grad school and wanted to have a show, an MFA show, and I was grateful that they had wanted me to start setting up earlier, but as things progressed with COVID, it all just got shut down, and I was able to document work and to have pretty much time by myself with my work, but my committee never got to see my full installation. I had a whole gallery, so yeah, everything just ended. I had a Zoom commencement, which I felt like
You felt rough.
Ray Goodwin made it special, but it was definitely, I felt robbed, to say the least.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of interesting since the discovery of you, Amalia, and I know I'm not the one who's going to be doing the interviewing, although asking, this gives me a perfect opportunity to just chat with you for a few moments before Demetri comes on. What time is it, by the way? Oh, that's it? Well then, okay, so then let me just ask, because I'm curious. The program that I'm assuming it's the same program that you both are in, that there's only one MFA program and it must be divided into the various disciplines, correct? Or so there's a tremendous emphasis on fiber. And just as Ramakan, do you know April and Amalia? Have you met them before?
That's a good question.
Okay, so I just thought maybe from the
I don't think we
introduction
have.
that they're, so Ramakan also works with fiber and ceramics in his sculptures, but tell me,
Yeah.
you are on it, girl.
Wow.
Yes.
Awesome.
Which is why I was hero worshipping earlier.
Well, thank you.
Okay, there's your moment in the spotlight, Ramakan.
Thank you.
So I'm really curious. You know, the whole program, both of you must have targeted that program knowing that you have interests in pursuing working intensive, immersive material studies. So, but I mean, beyond painting, beyond, you know, printmaking, we're talking fibers here. And so tell me about this. How did this whole program, I mean, did you target it? What were your thoughts in going through it? It looks like you are two artists, but that this program has some history and some real emphasis here. Anyway, okay, enough of the talk. Either
Go
way.
ahead, Amalia.
Well, my the way that I found fibers and that I found myself working with it was very much when I started the program here. I started right before because I was looking for materials that I could work at home and that were accessible to me. And so that was my introduction to it. But then being here and having access to a loom and having access to the resources on the program and also the history and the discourse that I didn't get that in, you know, before in undergrad or just as common knowledge. I didn't really know the history of weaving. And I think that for me, weaving was the way that I started working with fibers, and it slowly took over everything that I did. But I think that there's a very strong history of rope making here in Kentucky. And the program here, Arturo Sandoval, he is now a professor emeritus, and he really built that up. And then now Crystal Gregory is running the department, and she's just an incredible person to talk with. And a really incredible human to talk about textiles and the history of textiles. So I'm just, I don't know, I was seduced by the medium and by working with my hands. And I think that before, because I started with a sculpture background, I already had that. And this was kind of like a natural development.
So I'm
I feel the same way, that like I was just interested in the material itself, and then with such strong mentors there at present, I just dived in, and I had already experimented some with paper casting, and a little bit with fibers, but I had no traditional background, and I really just wanted to kind of take a break from ceramics. I had 13 years of it, and I felt like it wasn't exciting to me at the time, and I didn't know how to make the two kind of come together. So I just, after my first year, I just break from ceramics and just dived in with fibers, and then it started coming back, especially that last year, as a raw material. And I mean, looking at other artists and seeing how they're combining sculpture and ceramics, it's just that elemental materials that it makes sense conceptually and both physically. And then there was a lot, Arturo left a lot of material that was just available to the students, and even the piece that's in your gallery right now, Patricia, was all just given to me by him. That stretch bandage material, most of it was all just from storage. And so I just found this exciting, I found the process of like finding materials and repurposing them really exciting. And the program at University of Kentucky was really supportive of that and just let me play. And I think that's, in grad school, there's a lot of pressure to like, you want to find your voice and experiment, but at the same time you're supposed to make good work. And I had just kind of let that go, and the expectation of just play was so exciting to me that, I mean, I made a lot of work that wasn't as successful as others, but yeah, they're really a supportive university.
Well, from what I've seen through images, you both made work that was innovative, pushing boundaries, exciting. It had a very, very raw, essential quality to it. I'm losing the words as to how to describe it, but that's what drew me in. So if I understand, you both actually came to the program, but not with the intention necessarily of immersing yourself in fiber to the extent that you did. Is that correct? So it's just how it has evolved. And I was going to mention Ramakan. April also works, and you're working with mainly green clay, so it's not fired, correct? Is that true, April?
That's true. Yeah, it's a stoneware.
In really, and you're using it with the fiber, right? Sometimes you're dipping it in, yes. But I don't have any of those images online, and they won't be online. But nonetheless, those installations looked really interesting as you were pushing that.
Thank you. Yeah, I found different ways of kind of making it sealed and where it looks kind of wet with shellac, just these unconventional ways. They're not necessarily archival, but they still hold intact. Yeah. So, and it's dust. It is what it is, and I don't want to hide behind it really when I'm talking about that material in the work.
Right. So as different people join, I guess we're gonna. Oh, is it Jacqueline? Are you here? Jacqueline?
Is she?
Oh, maybe.
Hello? Yes, I was muted.
Oh, okay.
Oh, hi, Jacqueline.
Okay.
Hi, all. How's it going?
Awesome.
Good.
Love your work, as you know,
Vice
too.
versa. Super happy to be here. See everything.
Glad you can join us.
Yeah, happy to.
So I don't know if this is still operating.
It is,
Okay,
unless it's on, because it stopped.
it's stopped. So we're waiting
There you go.
for,
Demetri, I texted Demetri.
and where is he?
But we have this.
No,
We have 5 minutes
Oh,
until 1.
so as people join, I'm going to repeat myself a few times. Lavaughan is also,
Oh, Demetri's on now.
oh, Demetri,
Hello.
how are you?
Um,
Oh, I'm so glad you're here.
Hello.
It's nice.
so am I. Sorry about that.
Where's
Saturday
Lavaughan?
is,
No,
I just
why?
totally got into my groove for Saturday.
Yes.
And then I looked up and was like, oh my God, what time is it?
So I'm not sure how all of this works, and Vincent is right next to me, so I apologize to everybody for wearing my mask, but I have to wear my mask because I don't know how to operate this Zoom session, which,
You're on the still image right now, your profile image.
oh, so you don't see me anymore. Okay, well, nonetheless, that is saving your eyes is all I can possibly say to you. But we're gonna wait for, oh, Lavaughan. Nope,
Hey, Lavaughan.
I only,
Here.
okay.
I
Oh no,
There you
you're
go.
right ways.
There you go.
know
Right.
which way is better for you guys.
Well, which
That way is much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Let's do sideways.
Okay, there you are. There you are.
All right.
So, Lavaughan, I just want you to know that April and Amalia are also here, along with others who are joining in. So, is everybody going to be visible? Is that the deal?
If they want to be, or they could hit stop video if they don't want to be visible.
Okay, so this is my very first Zoom session. I have in the past hosted a number of conversations, which Demetri has, I've invited Demetri to be in conversation with various artists. So I am used to standing up and introducing. I am not used to looking at this little round thing and introducing in this manner. But we
Keep
are
talking. Yeah.
we are going to do the best we can with me, and I am going to, in a few minutes, introduce Demetri to you. And Demetri will introduce you, Amalia, April, and Lavaughan, and then pick up and ask, carry on a conversation with you. In the event, uh-oh, I've lost you.
No,
now.
keep going.
In the event that I, for whatever reason, can't pop in at the very end, please know I really thank you for participating. I wish, once again, you could be here in person, but maybe on another occasion. And if there's any comments or thoughts after and you want to continue for a short period of time, please feel free. But Demetri will probably leave. We are planning on, what, 45 minutes, Demetri? And then some time for questions. Would that is that
Exactly.
reasonable?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. So what time is it?
It's 2 minutes till 1.
Oh, it's 2 minutes to 1. Okay. So we're going to continue. Gerson, is that you? You're muted, but it is you. Was Sandy there? So as I see people that I know, I'm just sort of.
Now I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Okay.
That I'm supposed to keep talking. Vincent is making things work over here. So just give us a couple of seconds here, and I'm going to keep, hang on one second. Okay, I'm supposed to be talking. Okay. I can't talk if I can't see anybody. I have to see them. Okay.
Well, you got a bunch of people.
Well, I'm glad. Okay, can you get us going here so we can? Give me 2 seconds, folks.
Ramakan, it's good to see you.
Thank you, Demetri. It's good to see you as well, and everybody else.
I love seeing you, Amalia, Lavaughan. You guys all are in your studio space. April and I are in. April, at least you're outside enjoying the weather.
Yeah, it's a work day for me. So I'm still in the studio. When we're done, I'll just turn right back around and
good for you.
keep painting.
That's brilliant.
That's the beauty of Zoom. You can just get back to work immediately after.
It might be the best thing ever. I don't have to leave to talk to people. I can stay here.
Very efficient.
I'm going to jump in here for one moment and thank everybody for joining us for the Zoom session with Amalia, April, and Lavaughan. Demetri Broxton, who is somebody I have known for many years and respect both his artwork. He's a phenomenal artist, and also his work at the Museum of the African Diaspora, where he is a senior education director and hosts and is very, very fluid and comfortable hosting Zoom sessions. He's also hosted some conversations in the gallery, one of them with Ramakan Orwesters, and is considered a friend and an associate that I treasure. So thank you so much, Demetri, for joining us today and hosting this conversation with the artists. Demetri will introduce the 3 artists in the current exhibition, of which I want to also mention this is the last day of the exhibition. So I have so enjoyed hosting it, and once again want to reiterate that I regret that you couldn't be here in person, but there will be another occasion where you can join us in future exhibitions. But thank you so much for trusting me, sending your artwork, allowing me to do a fabulous installation that you never saw. But let me turn it over to Demetri at this point, and once again, thank everyone for joining all of us in this Zoom session. So, Demetri, thank you.
All right, hi everyone. So really the format of this is I'll read through the artist bios, and then I have questions for each of the artists, and then I will follow that up with some questions for the group. And then, as Patricia said, we're gonna reserve some time at the end for audience members to unmute yourselves and to ask your questions. I'll ask you if you would, let's see how we'll do this. If you'll, as we kind of go along and questions come up for you, if you'll put those into the chat, and then that'll be the easiest way for me to call on folks to say their, to ask their question, because we have a good number of folks on the call, so it'd be much easier if people didn't just start talking at the same time. Does that sound like a plan everyone's cool with? I see a few people in there. Okay, awesome, wonderful. And Amalia, can you, with your last name, is it Broche?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, awesome. That works, or how do you say it?
That's a great question. I think everyone in my family says it differently, so it's fine. Broche
Okay,
sounds
awesome.
great.
All right. So Amalia, Galdona, Broche's woven textile sculpture installations speak to the complexity of growing up in a culture, country, and political system vastly different from her family's adopted country and the United States of America. Leaving Cuba when she was an adolescent meant separating from what she knew, understood, and was part of. The culture, divisions, history, and politics of America posed a distinctly different way of existing, interacting, and thinking. Her work emphasizes this complexity. Tired of viewing art history through a lens devoted to Western European art, Lavaughan Jenkins decided to contribute his vision, a vision where Black people were not subordinate to European construct, but instead were featured by a Black artist. Lavaughan Jenkins' sculptural paintings tell a story that reflects the ordinary, the non-heroic, the quiet countenance of a single Black individual. April Wright is a visual artist from Germantown, Tennessee. She uses humble, readily available materials to connect personal narratives about home, relationships, memory, and identity. Wright completed her BA in sculpture and ceramics from Union University in 2006. She is currently a third-year MFA candidate teaching and studying at the University of Kentucky with a focus in ceramics and fiber. She works interdisciplinary in sculpture and installation art. Getting tongue-tied there. So I want to start off. I'm gonna, Lavaughan, ask you a couple questions. So, you know, I've heard, and, you know, through your bio and also through speaking with Patricia, that you considered yourself a football player and then you became an artist. When did you realize that you were an artist?
When I went to art school.
What prompted you to go to art school then?
It's a really weird, I'll tell it quickly because I know we have other artists. But basically I never wanted to be an artist. And when I moved to Boston, I took some electives in a couple writing classes at a junior college school, and one of the electives happened to be a drawing class, and that professor happened to teach at the Massachusetts College of Art. And for whatever magical powers that he possessed, he found something inside me and suggested that I go to art school, and basically got me an introduction to whatever that person is that you speak with to enroll in the school. My mind's blanking now, but said that this gentleman belongs in art school, and she was pretty awesome enough to just like, hey, well, take a couple of projects, do these projects, take them home, bring them back. If they're awesome, then you're in. If not, then we just, you know, it's over. And I brought this work back, and she said, you know, congrats, you're in art school. And that was the day I guess I was supposed to be an artist. It literally happened just that fast.
Mm-hmm,
you know?
mm-hmm.
And I know it's not unique to everyone else's, but it's pretty weird. So, but truly, one day I went to an art school and did some projects, and then I was in art school. So
that's pretty amazing. I also want to talk to you about scale. You know, for folks who haven't had a chance to visit the gallery, seeing the sideshow, well, you can see the dimensions actually, and the titles, but you know, football and the stature of a football player is large. And you know, you look like a burly guy just from the video, but the scale of your work is very intimate, and while, you know, you layer the material thickly, they still have this delicate look to them. Can you talk about your choice for scale?
Sure. I'm not to sound like I'm not like very serious, because I paint every day, I work every day, but my thinking is very minimum. You know, I do the size, particularly in the beginning, because it's what I could afford. because they're majority made out of oil paint. So the cost is really high, but also I have a tiny home studio, so I need the room. So I was like, well, I should probably start off making these small, and that would fit the size of maybe a Barbie doll, or I always reference them to the Oscar, you know, because I got to run around spaces like an Academy Award with them from time to time, you know. But that was the idea, that and also that's the same shape of the size of the figures that I was making when I was working on paper. So I wanted to make sure that transition from paper to 3-dimensional had as many aspects of 2D as my 2D work as possible. And size was definitely one of those things I could bring over. And it all just tied into everything else, dealing with space, time, money, things like that, and still trying to put as much of an impact into them as I could. You know, now I've sold a few and I have more opportunities, so now they're getting bigger. So now I'm doing life-size things and stuff like that. So.
That's amazing. Yeah, and we can see one behind you in the studio right now. So my next question is for Amalia. So having grown up in Cuba and arriving at the U.S., you know, into the U.S. at an early age, can you speak about your first impressions about arriving here, the differences, and how those have an impact on the work that you make?
When I came into the US, I didn't speak the language, and everything was just such a culture shock in terms of the very militant education and secular upbringing that I had in comparison with high school here, because I came in ninth grade, which was very, very interesting, just going into public school and experiencing that in a completely different way that I had experienced school. So for me, I didn't speak the language, so I had to do major readjustments in many fronts, not just the way that I thought and the way that I communicated and my demeanor and the traditions and the culture that I came from, but the very, you know, like the very words, I just couldn't really communicate with people. But I started taking art classes as soon as I, just like as an extracurricular activity, but also during high school. And that was the one place where I felt like I was myself, that was the constant between this before and after. And it was a way also that I could communicate even my value, because I felt so inadequate and so self-conscious about who I was, and just that I couldn't even talk to people. So art was my language.
That's amazing. I love that connection that you and Lavaughan just made between finding yourself through art, and you know, kind of being that outlet for how you were able to express yourself and able to express a different side of yourself. You also, your work involves intensive use of knots. Can you talk about the symbolism of knots in your work?
Yes, knots for me are an embodiment of thoughts, memories, ideas, and I started working with knots because I was referencing the version of the knots, which is this version of the Virgin Mary that you pray to her, and you knot or tie a knot that's supposed to be or embody the problem that you're praying to her about, and she's supposed to undo these knots for you. But in my work, I use that metaphor, and in terms of I'm okay with these knots and I want to keep them, and they are a record. They don't need to be tangled. They just need to be accumulated because they are memories, and I don't want to do away with them. I actually want to gather them and keep them close.
Oh, that's amazing. I think, you know, one of the really connections between the work that you make with Lavaughan's also, and maybe I can kind of open this question up to both of you to tie them in, is the significance of the figures and how that relates to the rest of the body of work that you create.
I can go first.
Well, yeah, please. I'm thinking.
Well, for me, the figure, I work with the figure and I always reference the figure, even if I'm working abstractedly. And sometimes it's the absence of the figure that I want to talk about. But with this series of works, I wanted to embody and materialize something that was more tangible for me and more relatable in terms of the body. But it's just an embodiment in terms of something that's recognizable. And it is very much portraiture for me and self-portraiture, because I see myself in every single one of these bodies and these figures that I've created.
Yeah, and I'll jump right off from there. That in most cases, I do consider my portraiture. I think from my learnings through art history, the figure has always been really important. I think even when you get into abstraction, it's a place where we all started was with the figure, and its importance. I think, especially today in our lot of discussions and issues in society right now are built around the figure, as we are. And so I think even when I'm thinking really, really abstract, and which I mean, obviously these figures are pretty abstract where they don't necessarily have eyes and noses and things like that. But that idea, that structured idea is I'll be able to make this mold and I can throw anything into it and it will retain the shape, and it's filled with all these emotions and ideas and memories, and it's all built up into there, which is my reflection of how I load up the paint.
I think that building up of the layers and the intensity of the process is something that connects you, and actually kind of thinking about Patricia as a curator and gallerist, it's a common theme through many of her artists. April, I also want to get to you, and I understand that you grew up in the South, and so we kind of heard from the other artists about their pathway into art and how that related. So why art for you?
I feel like I was never good at it, but I just love the idea of expressing something from my heart and something that I'm passionate about, and art allowed me to do that. Even since just high school, my junior year, I finally took an art class and had a very encouraging teacher that was like, it's going to be hard, but if you can endure and be passionate about it, anything's possible. It can take you places. And I really listened to her, and then in college I was going to take a couple art classes, but it was like really by happenstance that like they went on and signed me up to be an art major and kind of by accident. And I was like, well, that kind of works for now. I'll take the foundations and see what happens. And pretty much just fell in love with it. And then I was introduced to clay by Aaron Lee Benson. And that class just kind of opened my eyes to what art could be. I never really understood sculpture. I mean, I see these monuments around me. I had gone to some galleries, but I don't have the background of the education of museums besides historical museums, science museums. I never was really informed. And so that kind of opened up a new world for me. And then starting to see things in New York in different trips. And and then I sort of had a 10-year break between undergrad and grad school, but I kept applying, and I was interested in teaching because I love to share the knowledge I have and the things that I know about art. And so that's the route that I decided to take in the University of Kentucky, and opened my eyes to like all these different materials that I could discover. I just kept at it. I think at the end of the day, if you just show up and show out, it will it gets you there. And I'm kind of like Lavaughan and a similar story. Like I just, it kind of just fell in my lap, and it made sense to who I am as a person too, and how I work. I'm really interested in how I can use these metaphors to kind of shape how we see the world through art, and especially object making. I've always been an object maker. I think that's like the foundation of kind of who I am. And then now with going to grad school and kind of understanding why I make what I make and why I use those materials, that just helps inform my work and the things that you know that are there, but you don't know how to put words to it. If you go back to the material itself, that will speak to you, and that's enough. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah, talking about the material and your choice of material, can you tell us what role your choice of material plays in expressing identity and also the sense of resistance that your work embodies?
Sure. Yeah, I come from a pretty, I would say, conservative background. I tend to want to resist family expectations of me, and also my way of thinking isn't always how they think, and that's always in conflict. And I kind of, it feeds the work. It's not really what the work's about. I think that I'm more interested in these fragile narratives that are around us every day, and or, you know, things from like something catastrophic to something really personal and deep and intimate. So the materials, I'm really right now, and that's in one of the works that's at Patricia's gallery, interested in this inside of the punching bag material, where I'm taking a punching bag and sifting through the lint and then the individual pieces of cloth and seeing what I could make out of them. Right now I'm forming gate-like structures. I've made a couple of kind of window fences and thinking about the architecture of space and how that can shift to being something soft versus something hard, and what that says to the viewer, and an emotional response to that, kind of this emotional turmoil that we kind of deal with every day, and the cleanup of that, and kind of how we make sense of our world. I kind of translate that with cloth, and I think cloth as an everyday material, I mean, there's so much more than even my own personal biases with it. There's so much history in cloth and the thread, and I think for me right now, what's resonating the most is like that punching bag material, that individual life of one cloth, and how that speaks to quilt making and how we gather it together and try to make sense of it, try to mend it, try to create a narrative out of it. I feel like the punching bag material just can speak to a lot of different audiences, and there's so much. I've put it in clay before. I've made bricks. I've created walls with it. So there's a lot of things with that I'm still interested in.
That's awesome. I want to.
It's rich.
It is, and I'm like, oh wow, it's interesting for me that your image is right next to Ramakan too. I think it sounds like you guys have a lot of overlaying in your process.
Sure.
So I want to. Yeah, I want to know from all of you, what has, and you can answer this how, whoever wants to answer this question. How has your work been impacted by, I mean, we've been in this COVID quarantine for several months, for the better part of this last year, actually. And now we also have, it's a politically charged moment. Some would argue, and I would be in there, that, we haven't had this level of political charge since really the 60s at this point. It's kind of this new moment where, the entire world now is impacted by this health crisis. And then at the same time, we also have a civil rights call for action that is going beyond our borders here with the United States. How are those two things coming, that are really boiling up right now? How are those impacting the work that you make, and how you envision your work within, functioning out in the world?
Yeah, well, I think I'll go first this time. So I'm a pretty emotional painter, and I need life to kind of be lined up and organized and in a healthy spot for me to really, really create and connect to the work that I create. So I had just finished Volta Art Fair in New York in March when it really hit pretty hard on the East Coast. And I thought, perfect. This will lock me into my apartment where my studio is, and I'll just be able to keep creating. I don't need to go outside, you know, I don't need to see people and things like that. And then shortly after, you know, I wasn't painting. And I didn't paint for maybe 2.5 months, where I thought that this would be, I'd be making a painting a day because I'm free 24 hours a day. You know, I went to making zero. I was making 0 paintings, and it wasn't until the murder of George Floyd that got me charged up. Typically, something when those things happen, I don't get charged up. I kind of quiet off a little bit more and do less work. You know, because I'm thinking and I'm experiencing all of these things, all this history and emotions that have been built up and pushed back, and it did the opposite for me this time. It made me want to use my platform to support one, because now I can make work and donate sales and things like to different foundations and organizations. But also my figures took on the role of being political, which typically I don't. But they started to have a lot to say about the things that were happening, and I, like this show, my work is typically untitled, and now they have titles because that's just more of a. I wanted to make sure that I allowed them to have the biggest voice that they needed to say the things they needed. Because people, I think, pay more attention to my work than they do me. I'm not a big talker, so I give them the floor and they can stay and do all the things that I need them to do. You know, and but they became about today and things, and so I was really fortunate that it impacted me in this way, because I really thought that I just wasn't going to paint for the year.
Oh wow!
And it's really pushed me, and I'm doing probably more work now than I would typically do. I work a lot, but I think I'm really my foot's really on the pedal right now, and I'm making work specifically about these moments, and hopefully soon they'll be getting out there, and I can start raising more money for these causes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Amalia or April?
I can go next. So for me, I lost access to a studio, and I was still trying to make as much as I could. I was back and forth between Florida and Kentucky. And so that was so hard for me, just moving my studio, moving my work every so often. It was just a lot to deal with. And because the work is bigger, and because I rely on the use of looms and resources to make these weavings that then end up composing the skins of the sculptures that I make, it was so hard for me to try to translate that into something that I could do at home. So it slowed down my progress so much, but it also made me think more about sustainability within my practice, and a way that I could make it so that when I don't have these resources, when everything goes wrong, that I can continue making my work in a way that's sustainable. And then with the Cultural Revolution and everything that's happening, my work was already trying to draw references from Spanish and West African belief systems and cultures and traditions, and trying to see how all of that interacted to create Cuban culture, and then how that is further complicated by someone that's of Cuban heritage in the United States, and all of those layers of complexity. But also, my work was also really concerned with where were all of these histories in my education, both in Cuba and in the United States. Where are all the artists? Where are all these belief systems that are so integral in our everyday? And these histories are erased, and we can't really draw a line back to them. And so that's a lot of what my work is about, is trying to retrace that and trying to find a language and an alternative belief system or an alternative universe that does honor everything in a way. And then as an educator, or an emerging educator and working in academia and TAing and all of that, it really has pushed me to reevaluate what I'm perpetuating and what I want to do. And it has given me the courage also to be more, to find more resources, to define the way in which I teach, and try to redefine the educational system in a way so that I'm not perpetuating the same education that I got, and everything that I'm kind of rebelling against in a way.
That's amazing.
Trying to anyway.
Trying to.
For me, I think that you had an old bio on me, but I've graduated, so I've been in transition.
Oh, you graduated, okay.
School. Yeah, that's okay. I'm not sure if I updated my website on that yet, but I was given an opportunity to be an artist in resident for 6 weeks in Columbia, South Carolina, at their 701 CCA program, and it was shelter in place, but it was all in June when everything was happening with the riots and things, and I felt like, why am I even trying to push myself right now? It seems so futile. And I don't remember who I heard, but I was listening to a lot of artists, and I had even studio visits with some artists. I think Elizabeth Alexander's on right now. I had one with her, and
wow.
I felt like that confirmed, like, just our conversations, like, why this is so necessary. At a time as this, artists need to rise up and still keep making and still keep talking about what the work's about and how it's relevant to humanity in itself. I feel like, if anything, my work is trying to speak about that and the value of a life, and where we're kind of placed in these cultures, and things are, the veil's kind of been ripped in front of us, and how ugly all of this is. It's still, we need to face it, and things need to change. And so for me, like, having that little bit of time to reflect, but I mean also make work, I still went back to the punching bag material, and that's when I was making gates and window frames or whatnot, and that's when I also made the piece that's in Patricia's gallery with the punching bag, and just having those meditative, labor-intensive processes where you're not really sure what the end product's going to be, but you're working through it. Like, you're trying to make sense of it all again. So I had that, and then I'm on my way to Mendocino, California. I'm their new fiber resident there for 7.5 months. So I definitely feel like it couldn't have come at a more necessary time, but it also is, like, very unsettling, like, moving, and I've never been to California, and driving in my old car, and it's like all these unsettling things, but you know, why not? You know, so, and going back to these craft practices, and I'm having to teach myself some of these things, like bookmaking or whatnot. I feel like it still is relevant to the arts, and it can come back into your practice too. And I love teaching about craft, and I love even teaching myself and sharing with others. I think that's how we grow I have a desire to be a teacher, and I feel like when I can implement what I learn into my practice, I think that's where growth happens.
The next question, I'm excited for you for that residency in Mendocino, and I'm jealous.
Thank you. Me too, yeah.
So gorgeous up there. Yeah,
That is gorgeous.
I have a question that actually I got from you, April.
Okay.
Thinking about everyone's choice of material and how there's a layering, or there's all of you do this repetitive, you know, whether it's knots or using layers and layers of paint, or weaving together different materials. How does your choice of not only the specific material that you use, but the repetitive nature of building layers upon layers, how does, for you, I'm sure in making the process you have your own personal experience, but what is the experience that you seek the viewer to have by experiencing the layers and layers, and you know, the process for you building up these layers of these materials?
I do appreciate work that you can see the time it took in it, and I think there's content in that, even as simple as it can be. But I mean, for me, I want them to see the material for what it is, but also what I'm trying to say with it, and I'm trying to make it have resonance with something that's discarded, such as cloth or shredded clothing from the inside of a punching bag. Just indexing the materials and then them seeing them for how I have created them into a sculpture, or just hung them as is, and just a simple gesture of just being hung from the wall. I think that they can see in what the material is, what it's trying to say in that it's been tattered and torn, it's been worn out, but now it's trying to rebuild itself again. It's trying to make new. And I think there's always this little bit of redemptive quality that I'm seeking after in my work, and I feel like in others that I'm looking. I love the dark and the melancholy, but I'm seeking that moment of like hope. Like there's a moment where things do start making sense, even if they're complicated, they're complex, and that's what I feel like the biggest takeaway I hope that people get, like in the midst of like something being tangled and bounded and complicated. Like there's that moment of a fragile moment of a resolve, really. That it's something is trying to make sense of it. Hope that answers your question in a roundabout way.
Sure. No, definitely. Do either of the other artists want to tackle that question?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. Basically, I had a dream. Yeah, I dream a lot about artists. Artists talk to me a lot in my dreams, and particularly the three-dimensional idea was from Philip Guston, who visited my studio and gave me a credit. Yeah, it's a crazy story.
Wait! He really did, or in this dream he came to you?
In my dream, like obviously this was like 2017.
Okay.
And, you know, and we were talking, and basically he was like, if you're gonna really make a moment in art, you're gonna need to really figure something out. And that's not like what you're doing. Not that it's bad, but it's not enough. You know, where my direction, I needed to speed that process up, but also risk a bit. And he was like, you should be a three-dimensional painter. And I was like, well, I've never really heard of a three-dimensional painter. And he's like, figure it out. And he's like, but that's what you're missing, and it's what is really going to push your work into a different realm, you know, literally. And I think as an undergrad, I always saw those big magical paintings in the museums, and I always thought about it'd be really cool to walk around them, see what they see. Like we become the viewed, and they're the viewer. like what would that feel like? And so I thought, well, what if I just literally rip off the figure that's on my canvas or on my paper and set them into reality? And I work with a ton of layers, but that's from me looking at landscape art and really loving. I was obsessed with the Hudson River School, and so I love seeing those terrains and how those those pathways through things, and that's kind of how I approach my buildup of paint, was to kind of give you those terrains, so when you're walking or hiking, you see more and more, and each time you go, there's a little bit more there. And so my layers are really about that, really about the view of being able to get in and see something and come back and see something completely different, and that's just not the texture, but that's the 360 view idea. It's like every time you see it, you're going to be able to see more, you're going to be able to feel more and think more about what you just saw. And I think the texture wise gives you that max amount of opportunity to further take the narrative.
That's awesome.
For me, I think of the weavings as a second skin, and I think of textiles as a second skin because it's so intimate, and we're always wearing clothes, or we're always surrounded by curtains, or we seek protection in our bed sheet, and warmth and shelter in a way. So there's two ways in which I approach that. One is I pair up textiles that already have had a life and a story, and they belong to someone, and there's so much history and time imbued in these textiles. And I tear them up, and then I knot them, and I warp them or wrap them, or I join two pieces of clothing that had nothing to do with each other and just complicate their stories and entangle them like that, in the same way that our lives kind of get entangled just by meeting each other, and we all affect each other, and through every interaction there's no way to go back, and in the way that we relate to each other. So that's one way. And then the other way that I think about my materials is just in terms of the opposites, in terms of the weaving, just the warp and the weft, and how these threads are in, like they're binaries and they're in opposition, and how they start out by being linear. So they started with one dimension and they become two dimensions, and then the moment that you take it off the loom, they can be so flexible and versatile, and they can pick up, space, and they can form three-dimensional space and create volume. And I think that's just, I'm so fascinated by that, and everything that they hold and everything that they conceal in a way. So I'm interested in binaries and in terms of that. And so when I finish these pieces, I want them to be layered and complex, and I want there to be little treasures of like little rewards, so that when people invest more time in specific areas, they can see through all of these layers of knotting and weaving, and they can find specific things within these areas.
I think I'm feeding back of myself. I think with your work, Amalia, I noticed, and one of the things I don't know that we can fully capture in the images here is the life size of scale of the pieces. And I think your work also really, I think, it's really nice. I think April's work is very on the abstract scale, and Lavaugh's is very figurative, and your work kind of is that middle ground between them. And so it's nice to see all the work together, to see these connections between the figure, the materials that are going together. Your work is very figurative. However, we can't quite see from these images, but there's a twisting and of the figures, and there's almost these impossible moves with the arm twisting behind the back, and the fingers being very gnarled up. Can you kind of talk about you mentioned how Cuba is an amalgamation of these different cultures coming together in these stories. How does that play out with the way that you portray your figures?
Absolutely. I think that there's something in the way that I approach the figure in terms of this urgency and this need to wrap and conceal, but also to reveal at the same time. And there's so many dichotomies and so many contradictions that are so frustrating. And in terms of the culture, the way that I grew up with this very socialist upbringing that's very militant, but also the way that Caribbean culture is, that it's so free and colorful and expressive. And so there's all of these contradictions in the way that I grew up that I think by having these twisting motions and this tension in a way, that it represents and it embodies the way that I go about the world, just carrying all of these contradictions with me and seeing the world and having all of these conflicting thoughts in my head about everything and yeah, every situation. So I think that I'm a very anxious person too. So I model for these, and these are just, I think these are actually things that I can do with my own body and ways that I move in a way that I try to capture.
so they are somewhat possible for you, not for people. I'm too stiff for that.
Only when I'm very anxious. I make
Only when you're very anxious.
Comforting, yeah.
And April, you know, your choice to not highlight the figure and to stay abstract. How does that connect with what you're trying to convey?
I think just back to, not to be like a resounding gong, but like material in use, like how can I use this material?
I didn't the material as a muse. Oh. Okay. Material
and use, like how can I use this material in such a way to express this humble stance of humanity, really. And I mean, I've used different gestures with objects and furniture and windows and whatnot, and that's kind of where I feel like, I guess, like the emotional part of where a figure would maybe could be replaced, but it's not. It's more about the object of the thing, and is where kind of I am expressing a certain emotion or kind of a disjointedness about that gesture or feeling, is where I feel like the narrative kind of comes to play. And it's also in like a couple of my installations, I was really trying to capture a moment where you can't really tell if something is falling apart or being built back up again. It's kind of like this in-between space, and those spaces I think are interesting with contemplation and the home as a space of you're not sure if this is stability or if it's not stable, like you're kind of in between that, and those are kind of those spaces I'm interested in, and how these boundaries are set up, both emotional and physical, and how the landscape of the home, really part of my research is more structured around that particular narrative and how I can express that through material and object making. Yeah, and building these layers, I mean, I feel like it just takes you deeper and deeper, like whether I feel like you're trying to build like Amalia was saying about a veil. You're building a veil, but in reality, like you're revealing so much more the more layers that go on a piece. It's interesting what happens sometimes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I also want to invite our audience members to please, I see I have one question in the chat, and you can just say I have a question. You don't have to write your whole question. And so Joel, I'll definitely get to you in just a second. But if other folks have questions, please put them into the chat and we will definitely get to them in just a second. I love that question also, Joel. And just before we get into Joel's question, Lavaughan, you mentioned titles, and at least in the slideshow that we have right now, they're all untitled. I'm really curious to know what your titles are and for the new pieces that you're making and how you've gone about those titles.
Sure. Yeah, and those do have titles. I started to give all of my figures titles, but I just thought that with this show, I would keep it to what I traditionally do. But as far as the newer titles, the one great thing that's happened with everything that's going on this year is it's allowed me to not be as busy in travel. So I have a lot of time to be at home in the studio, but that also gives me time to connect with my family and making sure that they're okay. And so I've had the opportunity to really reconnect with my grandmother, and she's like 92. So she has played a big role into my work now. And she's very religious. And growing up, anytime anything was wrong or things were happening, we prayed about it. And so that's kind of what she's told me throughout this year. It was like, well, we're just gonna have to pray, you know. So there's I'm absolutely gonna blank on his name because that's what I do in life. But there's a song called "Grandma's Hand."
Oh yeah, Bill Withers.
And I thought when I found that song that it was about me and my grandmother. And to tie that back into George Floyd, him calling out to his mom forced this connection that if this year didn't happen, I would never found that song. Because I've heard that song before, but it's never had that big of a role in my work. And it's one way that I can pull my grandmother into my work, as well as my mom, and connect all the social injustice that's happening and kind of force my figures to kind of hold that weight for me. So things like that and songs like that from that we were saying since the 60s, that's when all that music was happening. And so I found a lot of those songs to be really relevant today. And I've taken bits and pieces out of that, but also experiences that I've had or ways that I'm thinking about how I'm able to deal with these moments. Those become titles. You know, Grandma's Hand became a series of 8 paintings. And, you know, and other songs, things like that, that's kind of where they're going. But I'm also being more conscious of where I grew up and those memories that I had as a child and those moments and kind of bringing them forward. So grocery stores that don't exist anymore, that I remember getting to walk with my mom to the grocery store. So those moments, I pull them now so if they weren't already super personal, this year has forced me to reconnect with my work as well and push those boundaries of how much I actually want to share, as opposed to just allowing the viewer to kind of fantasize and create their own stories, you know. So that's where these titles are heading. And there's a million other titles, and I'm just like, my brain is like turning to mush. but also I'm naming a lot of the work after all the men and women that have been murdered. That's one really important thing for me. There were 3 trans women that were beat up and attacked in LA, and I gave them their names, a couple of titles to some of my figures as well, because I want to make sure that these people are remembered forever. And if my work is still intact and functioning, you know, with that title next to it, then they're going to be able to live forever, and people won't be able to forget. You know?
That's amazing, and I love that, you know, this moment has given you an opportunity to reflect on your work and how not only it relates to you and your own personal processing of this moment, but also how you want it to live out in the rest of the world. Joel, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, Amalia.
See you. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, Amalia.
You are such an amazing and serious artist, but people don't know you have an amazing laugh as well. So could you tell us your plan to become the next Queen of Fiber?
Oh my gosh. I PA'd for Joel at Penland this past, well, it's been a year ago now. And we have this ongoing joke that Joel is the next Queen of Fivers. So we just go back and forth. We're just bestowing this title on each other, but we know it's just Sheila Higgs. We're just trying to compete for it. I don't really have a plan right now. let it happen. We'll see.
I had a question also coming from Patricia. You know, Amalia, you were at Mass MoCA in April. You also were. When did you complete your MFA while the pandemic was going on?
Yes, I didn't have a show technically.
Yeah, but you know how those things were impacted, or just, you know, thinking about being at these amazing residencies.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you wanted me to just comment on my experience?
Yeah, you know, especially during the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, just trying to keep a sound mind is really important for me right now. I'm still processing and transitioning constantly from living at home for 2 months and feeling like I have no space to now being on my own and traveling to California and having all kinds of space and time, and yeah, and then just kind of having the rug ripped under me and not getting a show. And I mean, with many others that have had the same experience, I think so at the end of the day, I got what I wanted to get out of grad school, and you know, I think looking at it from a bigger perspective, my loss isn't as great as any others that have lost so much more and have going through so much. So I feel like putting things in perspective and being grateful for where I'm at and what's happened, and even these opportunities like right now, like I think that's what's important. And I think it also impacts the work, and such a time as this and what my work's about, I feel like is pivotal for our times. And yeah, I think though, I honestly want to do residencies for a year or two before like settling down in a tenure track position or visiting artist position in academia, teaching. It's time to travel. It's time to still keep making work. And I'm grateful that there still is residencies like Mendocino that I can go to and still thrive. Yeah, it's hard. It's difficult, but I feel like our world is ever changing, and all these virtual shows. I haven't had, I don't know about y'all, but like this is like record breaking for group shows, just mainly virtually. You know, you just keep applying and things happen, but yeah, I think it's just important to keep at it and don't get discouraged, and never give up. You know yourself, and you know what you're called to do and who you are. And I don't think that obstacles can definitely become challenging, but they can also become a way to grow. And I'm trying to see it like that. Yeah, that's been kind of my takeaway. It's not been easy, but I don't try to revel in the pity party. I try to like keep moving on. It's easy to quit. It's, you know, that's the easy thing. Most of us like maybe I just need to take a long break and just get a regular job. And, you know,
I think that goes back
yeah.
to like what Lavaughan said about the quote about, you know, these are the times where the work of the artist is the most important.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And there's a lot of content. There's a lot to just like
Right.
sift through and talk about. I mean, yeah.
Amalia, it looks like Vincent and Patricia switched their question. They want you to also talk about your titles, and this may be our last. I don't know, Patricia, if this is, do we want to bring, if audience members have other questions, plug them in. But yeah, Amalia, can you also talk about your titles?
Absolutely. So I started making this series as goddesses and deities. And that's why they're also halfway into this world, and the rest of their body is somewhere else. That's because they don't really belong in this realm in a way. But as I was making them, especially with COVID and everything that I was dealing with and all of these problems, they kind of became companions for me. And they became, rather than something that was unattainable and something that was just out there and that I had no link with because it's so perfect in terms of gods and goddesses, they became more relatable. And they embodied my problems, and they embodied my body. They were my body, essentially. So they became mothers and sisters. And they became mothers and sisters of these knots. And so they are deities in a way, and they don't belong in our realm, but they appeared in a sense so that they're very much for me in terms of the way that they exist visually, and they take the form of these memories and problems and issues, but they in a sense also the horns became really important. The number of horns determined whether they were mothers or sisters. If they're younger, they have less horns, and so they are sisters in that way. And so mothers are, you know, the more knots that they have and the more experience that they have, the more they become this idea of mother. So that was my thought for that. And then I made a distinction between being veiled versus holding knots, versus day and night, depending also on the colors and the compositions that I created with the different weavings.
That's awesome. That's information we definitely, that definitely helps us to understand the work a little bit more. Thank you so much for explaining that. I see that Sarah Alexander also added a question. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to ask your question yourself, Sarah? I'm gonna assume that you want me to. So Sarah's asking, Lavaughan, can you talk about the clothing styles of your figures? How does fashion play into your choices?
Yeah, fashion's a big one. It's pretty much where I get most of my color ideas. I love fashion, and I love collecting as many pieces as I can. For you guys on the West Coast, there's like Amiri. It's probably my favorite out there. Mike Amiri is kind of like a street designer. So a lot of jeans, boots, flannels, things like that. And those are great color palettes for me. And what you guys don't see are some of my figures with dresses. And so I refer to art history, but my connection to art history and contemporary is Valentino. So I look at Valentino a lot for color inspirations and that energy that he puts into those dresses is unbelievable. So a lot of things that I own, but I'm always looking. If you're walking by me, I'm not really staring at you. I'm staring at what you're wearing, and I'm taking notes. And I'm like, yes, that is definitely going to be a painting later. But also like culturally, you know, there's certain brands and certain things that I identify with from childhood to now. So I'm pulling some of those things in as well. But the bottom line, the main thing is that I'm obsessed with fashion, and I probably look at more fashion than I look at painting for ideas.
So it's not just my imagination that they're wearing
No,
like
they're
high
wearing
top
clothes.
sneakers, but
Yes.
the like high top sneakers and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What about the body type? At least in
Me.
the series here, it seems like okay.
You know, so well, I mean, I'm joking, but I mean, I think as we all create, like we're all pretty abstract. So our best model is ourselves because we're in the studio with our work all the time. You know, but I looked at a lot of West African sculptures, Mesopotamian sculptures as well, or a big help for me trying to understand and figure out where I wanted to go with my three-dimensional figures. And they kind of typically had that shape to them. And so that was an easy reference for me to start from and like build from that. And the bellies are big and full. At one point, looking into Mesoamerican art, but Egyptian art as well. The idea of gift bearers. There was always these figures that were offering their whatever their wealth was in that culture to the hires, and I thought, well, what would I be able to give to the people that are viewing my work? It would be my memories and my stories. So the bellies are kind of where those things are stored. You know, I always say it's more room in your belly than in your brain, kind of thing, you know? And I can put more stuff in there. And so the bigger the bellies, the more stories and more memories they had to share. And,
that's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I never would have picked that. And you also made me start thinking about the like Nkisi figures from the Kingdom of Congo, not the current country, but yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's amazing. Does anyone have any final questions for folks? This is definitely your moment. And hi, Linda. So good to see you. I guess.
Demetri?
Yes.
Linda, did you have a question?
I was just waving, but I'm really moved by how much physicality is in the work. Like you work abstractly and the work is of the body, but do you find your physical gestures and just what you're experiencing maybe within the body or through your body, do you notice certain things coming to the surface more as you're working?
Who's the question for?
I think all the artists, but anyone who's interested.
I mean, sure. Yeah. I mean, I have some pieces that there's things like projecting off of it, maybe an inch and a half, or you know, I don't have a say in how much paint goes onto the figures. I kind of let the figures dictate where that goes, and I just react and respond. Even some of my pieces in the background that are on paper, they're coming off the paper now about an inch and a half. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Stop it. And they're like, no, we got a little bit more to say. So, so I just respond to whatever they're doing, whatever their conversation. And sometimes it says, let's get really crazy and let's really pack on some material. And I just say, okay.
Yeah, I feel very similarly too. I start out by trying to cover every inch, but then it's so hard to stop, and especially because I have all of these knots, because I'm always making knots. And so I have all of this material that needs to find its way onto a sculpture or onto a form. And so I find myself exploring specific areas that need more complexity. And sometimes I need to stop, and it's hard. It's like you gotta move on and cover another area or build up in another area. But yeah, I'm definitely drawn to exploring areas of complexity and building it up, and as much as I can.
Yeah, I think it comes to like over caring and caring enough for something. And there's this kind of conversation that happens, I feel like, in the process of building up materials that's interesting. Like, you don't know when it's really done until it's said enough. And I know that as abstract and vague as that sounds, but it happens. And yeah, a lot of that one piece, Night Aggregations, that's in Patricia's gallery, those ropes have been used in 2 or 3 other sculptures and then have been bounded a different way. And I had to figure out when enough was enough and what gestures that I wanted this weight to kind of carry. But yeah, the materials will talk to you, and it becomes this like embodiment with how you're responding intuitively and what it's saying. And then sometimes I have to push past that point of like, I've overworked the thing. It's something needs to be pulled back, and then I take away. So it's like this kind of responsive relationship with giving and taking away, over caring and caring for it. It's exciting. I like it.
So if I can just interject for 1 second, it's also interesting, Amalia, your work has a wire armature. Is that correct?
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Thank you. I go back and forth between a foam armature and a wire armature. And so the horns and the head sometimes have wire, and then they also have foam.
And then the fabric that you're referencing is all hand woven by you, correct?
Yes.
And it's adhered. How is it shaped and formed over the armature? And are you using, which unfortunately the images don't clearly indicate, you're using pins, silver and gold pins to secure the fabric to your armature? Is that correct?
Correct. My grandmothers were both seamstresses, so there's something really interesting for me in keeping those elements of the in progress portion of constructing a garment or mending a garment. And they're also, I go back and forth between the types of pins that I use too. Some of them are a little bit less threatening than others. Some of them I leave sticking out and such, but I sew the pieces together. I wrap them, I knot them so that they're secured onto the surface. Sometimes I use glue to secure the pins so that they will stay in place, but it's mostly the pins that are secured with glue that are holding it together.
Well, unless there are more questions, Demetri, unless there are more questions, I want to thank everyone, Demetri, for hosting and asking such wonderful, insightful questions, and for the artists, Amalia, April, and Lavaughan, who have really shared so much. I've learned more than I ever anticipated through this conversation. So thank you for being candid and forthright and really sharing who you are as artists and people and what's important to you. And thank Linda and Ramakan and everybody who's joined us today. I'm now inspired and looking forward to more Zoom events. It's actually given me some great ideas, and I want to hear more about both the process, the ideas, the materials that people are using and how they're thinking about working today with all the constraints in our lives and the politics of the moment, that are just going, that are with us and are influencing everything. So Demetri, once again, I thank you so much. You're invaluable. And April, I look forward to seeing you and when
Absolutely.
you arrive in California. It'll be nice to drive out to Mendocino. It's not that long of a drive, but you know, it's a hike. And Amalia, this is your last year, correct?
Correct.
I expect great things from you, absolutely.
Thank you.
Material to mine. And Lavaughan, incredible work. I was looking at the exhibition that you also are participating in. And where is that again? Lavaughan?
I don't remember. It's too many.
Well, whatever.
That's a good thing to have.
It's a great problem.
Large figures. Yeah, you're doing incredible work, and I congratulate you. And I'm so glad that you found your voice in art. Yes, rather than football, you found your voice. So I thank everybody, and once again, have a great Saturday. At least in San Francisco, the weather is nice, and well, April, it looks pretty good where you are too. And we'll close this off now, and I look forward to everyone joining us in the future for further conversations.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Mm.